The modern English word church comes from Old English kyrka. And what's interesting about kyrka is that it is coming from something like a West Germanic kyrka. Now, the k becoming a ch is what we call palatalization. And it happens with both of those k's in Old English. But you actually see it partially in Old Frisian, which is probably the closest related language to Old English. Old Frisian has kyrka. But in Old Saxon, which is the other closest language, the one just after Old Frisian, that's close to Old English, you have kyrka, which is almost exactly the same as a West Germanic. You have a very similar word for church in Old Norse, kyrkja, which is likely where the Scots dialect version of Kirk comes from, though, of course, these all probably stem from an ancient Greek, kyriakon, and those are essentially the basic words for church, right? Church is the word for church, right, in English. Though we did actually have in Old English another word for church, though it's a rather particular, not even a dialect word really, just from that school in Westminster. For example, Alfred uses it in his homilies, and that is Lathing. And Lathing means something like congregation, assembly, or church. It is essentially lathing, which is a modern word, with a prefix, which essentially means like co-lathing then, if you want it to be a barbarism. So a lathing in modern English essentially means invitation, and that's what Lathung in Old English also meant. And so a Lathing is essentially a invited together thing or a gathering. This doesn't survive in English. Of course, lathing does. The version of yeah would not. It'd probably be lathing or something like that in Middle English, and then that e would just been dropped completely in modern English. So you could say a lathing, I guess, if you wanted, again, which still has that invitation meaning in modern English, but I guess you could say that as like a congregation church sense as well if you wanted to, though I've never seen it used that way. Of course, it doesn't really survive. For example, though, you have the Middle English Alfred homily on Pentecost from about 1225. Bishopas des Irkan Hades on Godes Ilathunga, which is bishops are the same order in God's lathing, or God's church. Of course, that's the Middle English version of Alfred's homily. The Old English version, which would be late Old English, late West Saxon, is really similar actually in sound. It's Bishopas sind das Irkan Hades on Godes Ilathunga.